The auctioneer's gavel slammed down at the Austin Livestock Showcase. My cousin Beatrice smirked, loudly calling me the family charity case. Uncle Silas slid the invoice across the table. $14,500 for a champion breeding bull. He demanded I pay it to protect their social standing. I didn't argue. I just pulled out my phone and initiated the transfer, watching my veterinary clinic savings hit zero. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I watched the confirmation screen load on my banking app. $14,500. Gone. My parents died in an accident when I was 8, leaving me as a ward of Uncle Silas and Aunt Marion. Ever since I was a teenager, I had been the silent investor in their twisted version of a family. I managed the veterinary health for their entire herd. I balanced the ranch ledgers, tracked the breeding cycles, and delivered calves in the dead of night, all without a single paycheck. They framed my grueling labor as basic gratitude for the roof over my head. This is the insidious trap of normalized cruelty. When exploitation is introduced to a child as love, you do not realize you are signing a contract with predatory terms. You simply assume this is the going rate for survival. They never hit me. They just audited my existence every single day, making sure I knew my personal ledger was permanently in the red. Silas and Marion hosted lavish Texas barbecues, pouring expensive bourbon for local politicians, while I spent my nights in the barn treating sick livestock. Beatrice and her brother Warren got brand new trucks and fully funded college accounts. I drove a rusted pickup to my veterinary classes at the state university, paying my own way through every semester. I was the surviving scapegoat. The invisible chains of this role are heavy and silent. You are kept around solely to absorb the family's failures and finance their ego. You are not a daughter, a niece, or a cousin. You are an asset to be liquidated whenever the family runs a deficit. Today, that deficit was a champion breeding bull Silas bought at auction just to impress his wealthy neighbors. He didn't have the cash. He forced me to drain my clinic fund to cover his social debt. Handing over my savings to cover his ego was not a moment of heartbreak. It was a moment of absolute clinical clarity. The transaction was complete. My accounts were drained, but so was my obligation. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon some kind of familial regret, but there was only the cold realization that my subscription to this family had just been permanently canceled. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I looked at Silas's smug face, at Beatrice whispering a joke to Warren, and at Marion adjusting her designer hat. I analyzed the return on investment for my entire 28 years of life, and the math was glaringly obvious. They were a toxic asset. They weren't shocked by what they had done. They were simply comfortable with my compliance. But as I locked my phone and stood up from the auction floor bleachers, the numbness evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. This was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet, and I was finally ready to call in my debts. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the loud hum of the Austin auction floor was suddenly pierced by the sharp, authoritative strike of a wooden cane against the metal bleachers. The chatter around us died instantly. Great-grandmother Eleanor, the 82-year-old matriarch and fierce founder of Oakhaven Land and Livestock, was stepping down the aisle. She had been sitting 5 rows back, a silent observer to the entire transaction. Eleanor was a legend in Texas agriculture. She built an empire from the dirt up, and she did not tolerate fools or thieves. She moved with absolute precision, her silver hair pulled back tightly, her eyes locked onto Silas like a predator assessing weak prey. Silas's smug expression dissolved into immediate panic. He stood up quickly, knocking his knees against the metal bench. "Mother," Silas stammered, his voice cracking. "We were just handling some business." Clara was happy to contribute to the herd. Eleanor didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her voice cut through the silence, cold and razor sharp. "You are a coward, Silas. You are a financial parasite, masking your incompetence behind a girl who has done nothing but carry the weight of your failures." Marion tried to interject, her designer jewelry clinking as she reached out. "Eleanor, please, people are staring. We are simply keeping the family honor intact." "You have no honor to keep," Eleanor stated, her tone transactional and final. "I have sat quietly for 2 decades, watching you treat this girl like a piece of depreciating machinery. You forced her to fund your social vanity because your own ledgers are a mess of your own making. You think I don't see the moral bankruptcy sitting at this table?" Beatrice shrank back, hiding behind Warren, who looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Eleanor's gaze swept over all 4 of them, delivering a verdict that required no deliberation. "This family is a business," Eleanor said clearly, ensuring the surrounding ranchers heard every syllable. "And as the founder of this enterprise, I am liquidating your shares. You have operated on borrowed time and stolen equity. As of this exact moment, Silas, you and your wife, and your useless children, have forfeited any right to the Oakhaven legacy. You are officially defunded." The silence that followed was absolute. They were paralyzed. They weren't shocked by her cruelty. They were shocked that the bank had finally closed its doors. Eleanor turned to me. There was no pity in her eyes, only a clinical recognition of a fellow survivor. "Clara," she said, gesturing toward the exit with her cane, "we have an audit to conduct. Come with me." I didn't look back at Silas or Marion. I simply fell into step beside the matriarch. My anger wasn't loud, it was methodical. The reversal of power had been initiated, and I was ready to review the true ledgers of my family's history. The drive to the historic Oakhaven estate took 45 minutes. Neither Eleanor nor I spoke. We didn't need to. The air in the car was thick with calculation, not emotion. When we arrived, the heavy oak doors of the main house were already open. Walter, Eleanor's corporate attorney, was waiting in the study, a thick stack of forensic financial reports spread across the mahogany desk. I sat down opposite Walter. Eleanor took her position at the head of the table. "I do not have time for pleasantries, Clara," Eleanor stated, her voice unwavering. "My oncologist informed me last week that I have approximately 4 months left to live, pancreatic cancer. I processed the information clinically." There was a brief spike of grief, but I compartmentalized it. Eleanor wasn't looking for tears. She was looking for a successor. "I have spent the last 3 months auditing every single account associated with Oakhaven," Eleanor continued. "I needed to ensure the transfer of power would be legally bulletproof. What Walter and I uncovered was not just mismanagement. It was a calculated heist." Walter pushed a manila folder toward me. "Your parents set up a land sale trust before they died," he explained, tapping a column of numbers. "It was intended to fund your education, your veterinary practice, and your future. Silas and Marion were the trustees. They forged your signatures on the age of majority disbursement waivers. Over the past 20 years, they systematically embezzled $1.5 million from your accounts." I stared at the black and white ink. $1.5 million. I had spent nights eating cheap noodles, working my fingers to the bone, driving a rusted truck, while my uncle and aunt siphoned my inheritance to fund Beatrice's luxury vacations and Warren's failed business ventures. They had stolen my foundation to build their house of cards. "This is accounting fraud, grand larceny, and breach of fiduciary duty," Walter stated flatly. "But there is a secondary twist." Walter slid another document across the desk. It was the genetic registration for the breeding bull Silas had forced me to purchase hours earlier. "Look at the sire lineage," Eleanor instructed. I scanned the pedigree. My breath caught in my throat, not from sadness, but from a cold, blinding rage. The bull carried the exact genetic markers of my late father's rare cattle lines. Silas hadn't just made me pay for a random animal. He had forced me to use my own money to buy back the very legacy he had stolen from my father, attempting to erase my father's agricultural footprint and claim the prestige for himself. "They didn't just steal your money," Eleanor said, her eyes locked on mine. "They attempted to execute a hostile takeover of your father's memory. They made you finance your own genetic erasure." I closed the folder. The math was done. The audit was complete. I didn't ask why they did it. I didn't care. "What is our next move?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of hesitation. Eleanor smiled. It was the smile of a corporate raider about to dismantle a rival firm. "We execute the takeover." The fallout from the auction floor confrontation spread through the Texas agricultural community faster than a brush fire. Desperate to control the bleeding and manage their plummeting social stock, my cousin Beatrice scrambled for a microphone. 2 days later, she secured a guest spot on Texas Heritage and Soil, a highly rated agricultural podcast, broadcast live to thousands of ranchers and industry investors. I sat in Eleanor's study with Walter, listening to the live feed on a laptop. Beatrice's voice dripped with manufactured victimhood. She was attempting a public relations spin, framing Eleanor as a senile, confused old woman, and me as a manipulative opportunist who had hijacked the family empire. "It is just a tragedy," Beatrice crooned to the podcast host. "We gave Clara everything. We raised her. We fed her. We brought her into our home. And now she is using my great-grandmother's declining health to orchestrate this vicious takeover. It is elder abuse. Plain and simple. I didn't react. I didn't yell at the screen. I simply took notes." The host, a seasoned journalist, who had clearly been briefed by his own legal team, pushed back. "Beatrice, there are rumors circulating about forensic audits. Specifically, questions regarding a sudden influx of cash your parents received 2 decades ago. Can you explain how your family funded 3 separate ranch expansions without taking out any commercial loans?" I heard Beatrice's breath hitch over the audio feed. She wasn't prepared for a forensic interrogation. She was prepared for a sympathy tour. "That is confidential family business," Beatrice stammered, her polished facade beginning to crack. "My parents are brilliant managers. They made smart investments." On the screen, I watched the host glance down at the anonymous financial dossier Walter had strategically overnighted to his producers. "The public records show no commercial loans," the host pressed, his tone relentless. "But they do show a massive withdrawal from Clara's parents' land trust, a trust your parents controlled. Did your family misappropriate $1.5 million? The pressure broke her. Beatrice had never been held accountable a day in her life, and being cornered live on air triggered an immediate, catastrophic malfunction. "Misappropriate?" Beatrice shrieked, her voice skyrocketing into a frantic, unhinged pitch. "We didn't steal anything! We raised that ungrateful girl! Do you have any idea how much it costs to house someone else's kid? To feed her? To deal with her constant presence in our home? We earned that money. We deserved every single penny of that land trust for putting up with her." The silence on the podcast was deafening. The host didn't speak. Walter paused his pen. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen with absolute, icy satisfaction. She hadn't just slipped up. She had confessed. Live on air, in front of the entire Texas Agricultural Board, Beatrice had legally admitted to the embezzlement. She had publicly confirmed that they viewed my stolen inheritance as their rightful paycheck for the inconvenience of my existence. "Well," Walter said quietly, closing his notebook, "I believe that concludes the discovery phase of our lawsuit." I didn't smile. I just opened my laptop and began drafting the eviction notices. The PR spin had failed, and the self-destruction was complete. Armed with Walter's flawless forensic audits and the undeniable audio file of Beatrice's live podcast confession, our legal strike was swift, precise, and absolute. I didn't give them time to hire expensive defense attorneys or attempt to liquidate hidden assets. Within 48 hours, Walter secured a ruthless emergency injunction, freezing every single one of their assets and accounts. Stripped of the funds to fight back, their total defeat in the civil courts became a mere formality. While the criminal system began grinding them down, the hammer fell on a Tuesday morning. Silas and Marion were formally served with grand larceny indictments by the district attorney's office. I stood on the grand wraparound porch of the main estate alongside Eleanor, watching the authorities escort my aunt and uncle off the property. They looked bewildered, their faces pale and drawn, completely stripped of the arrogant entitlement they had worn like armor for decades. They were permanently terminated from all ranch management positions, Their access to the Oakhaven corporate accounts was immediately severed. Their company credit cards were canceled, and their luxury vehicles were repossessed by the estate. Beatrice and Warren faced a different, yet equally devastating kind of execution: total social and financial ostracization. The high society friends they had cultivated for years immediately stopped returning their calls. The elite Texas country clubs revoked their memberships. Their rented status evaporated overnight. This is the illusion of power in an empty wallet. When your entire identity is built on funds you did not earn, your perceived authority is nothing more than a leased asset. Silas, Marion, and their children truly believed they were agricultural royalty, but their superiority was just a fragile facade funded by stolen capital. The moment the money was drained, the illusion collapsed, revealing exactly what they were: insecure, incompetent, frauds. They didn't possess actual power. They merely possessed my stolen inheritance. Without my money propping up their vanity, their entire social infrastructure disintegrated into dust. I didn't feel a shred of pity as Beatrice packed her designer bags into the trunk of a cheap, compact rental car. She glared at me, her eyes red and furious, but she didn't dare say a word. She knew the contract was permanently terminated. I had systematically foreclosed on their entire existence. The power reversal was entirely clinical. They had spent 20 years viewing me as a marginalized burden, a piece of free equipment to be utilized and discarded. Now, they were being formally evicted from the only home they had ever known, facing years in state prison and absolute public ruin. I walked back inside the estate and sat down at the heavy mahogany desk in the main office. Walter handed me the finalized deeds and the foundational water rights documents. My name was printed clearly across the top of every page. The Oakhaven Ranch empire was fully, legally mine. I didn't celebrate. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. I had simply balanced the books, corrected a 2-decade-long mathematical error, and collected the debt owed to my father's legacy. The liability had been purged from the ledger. The pastures were quiet, the accounts were reconciled, and I was finally in total, undisputed control. Eleanor passed away peacefully 3 months later. There was no grand, theatrical, or tearful goodbye. She simply closed her eyes one evening in her leather armchair in the study, completely satisfied that her agricultural empire was finally secure. I arranged a private, dignified, and highly secure funeral. Silas, Marion, Beatrice, and Warren were barred from attending by armed private security, explicitly warned that any attempt to enter the grounds would result in immediate arrest for trespassing. The transfer of corporate power was perfectly seamless, entirely devoid of any messy, emotional, familial interference. I was now the sole proprietor of Oakhaven. With the massive estate firmly under my exclusive stewardship, I immediately began the meticulous operational process of restructuring Oakhaven land and livestock. I didn't want to merely run a highly profitable business. I wanted to definitively overwrite the toxic, exploitative history that my aunt and uncle had infected the soil with for 2 decades. The absolute first order of business was the strategic reallocation of the recovered funds. The $1.5 million stolen from my parents' land trust had been fully recouped through the aggressive liquidation of Silas and Marion's personal assets and properties. I didn't keep the money for my own luxury. Instead, I used that entire sum of capital to officially establish the Eleanor and Heritage Agricultural Trust. I designed it as a comprehensive, full-ride scholarship and commercial grant program specifically for veterinary students who had aged out of the foster care system or who had survived exploitative, abusive family environments. I wanted to ensure that talented, hard-working individuals would never again have to trade their dignity for a basic roof over their heads. I made sure they would never be forced to act as free, indentured labor for people who viewed them strictly as financial liabilities. Next, I turned my clinical attention to the sprawling pastures, the champion breeding bull that Silas had forced me to purchase. The very animal that had initiated this entire sequence of retaliation became the primary cornerstone of my new operation. Using my advanced veterinary expertise and the state-of-the-art facilities now at my disposal, I implemented a rigorous, scientifically backed breeding program. My objective was to completely restore my father's rare cattle lines. Within just a single year, the Oakhaven brand was universally recognized and synonymous with the finest, most resilient genetics in the state of Texas. I had successfully reclaimed my father's legacy, scrubbing every last one of my uncle's parasitic fingerprints from our family history forever. Life at the ranch eventually settled into a highly productive, incredibly peaceful rhythm. Early one Tuesday morning, just as the warm Texas sun began to break over the eastern horizon, painting the expansive sky in brilliant shades of bruised purple, deep orange, and gold, I stood by the reinforced steel of the main corral. I was teaching a new veterinary intern, a bright, determined 22-year-old young woman who had just received full funding from our trust program, how to properly assess the biomechanical gait of a yearling calf. As I stood there watching the intern take careful, meticulous notes, nodding thoughtfully at my precise clinical instructions, I felt a profound, unbreakable sense of closure. The ledgers were perfectly balanced, the business was thriving beyond all previous projections, and the toxic, draining elements of my past had been permanently liquidated from my life. I had taken an empire that was slowly rotting from stolen equity and normalized cruelty, and I had transformed it into an unshakable foundation of genuine agricultural excellence. I've come to realize that the most powerful thing you can do when faced with systemic exploitation isn't just to fight back with loud, undirected anger. It's to systematically dismantle the power structure of those who hurt you and then build something undeniably beautiful in its place. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. But forgiveness absolutely does not mean allowing them continued access to your life, your resources, or your energy. It simply means accepting that their emotional debt to you is a permanent sunk cost, officially severing the contract, and moving forward with absolute, unapologetic clarity. True accountability isn't about chaotic vengeance. It is about drawing a hard, non-negotiable line in the dirt, securing your own structural foundation, and decisively proving that your worth was never theirs to define or diminish. You do not have to carry the heavy, unearned weight of a family that views you as nothing more than a convenient burden. You have the absolute right to audit your relationships, immediately close the accounts that drain you, and confidently invest in a future where you are the sole proprietor of your own peace. If this story reminded you that quiet strength and clear boundaries are more powerful than anger, please like, subscribe, and share your own experiences in the comments below.